more about the impact on these children. What effects does this have on children who now discover that their family members are no longer with them? Sometimes they're told that they're incarcerated, sometimes they're not. So, Melissa, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Let me unmute myself. Hello, I'm Melissa. Oh, I skipped ahead. Uh-oh. How can I go back? Monica, do I have control? Yeah, sorry about that. So there's a study, it's the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. And so there's a lot of research around adversity and these adverse childhood experiences and how certain like traumatic or adverse childhood experiences can impact someone's life, like not just today, but their health, their ability to process things, their emotional well-being, all of those things. And so we do know that parental incarceration is considered an adverse childhood experience. And if you haven't heard about this, like please do the TED Talk with Nadine Burke-Harris. It's incredibly informative. And a lot of research is coming out about resiliency through that. But it's important to know that parental incarceration for kids specific, it is a traumatic experience. And so they do, like we mentioned before, experience a great deal of shame, trauma through other things that happen that I'll talk about, and stigma. So this incarceration, as we already know, like it doesn't just impact the person who got locked up and is behind bars, right? It impacts our community. And when you think about the little babies, right? These are kids, often 10 years or younger. And so it does increase the risk of living in poverty, having household instability, other risk factors, substance abuse, mental health abuse. And that's significant. And it's also really important to understand like how the actual arrest itself can impact a child. So not only is the parent being incarcerated, being taken away, right? They are no longer around, that's going to impact the kid. But even the moment that a parent is incarcerated, 67% of parents were handcuffed in front of their own children. And you can read these statistics. Like I don't have to read them word for word to you. But when we start to think about little children seeing their parents, often their heroes, somebody you look up to, right? Like, had I ever seen my dad taken away in a police car, having a physical struggle, being sprayed with pepper spray, like that that is the beginning of the trauma. And so just imagine how that could impact a child. And so then it says right here that if they've witnessed that arrest, they're 57% more likely to have elevated post-traumatic stress symptoms. So from beginning, this incarceration is impacting kids. So what's some of those impacts, right? So we've got chronic sleeplessness, difficulties in concentrating, depression, anxiety, withdrawal. Kids often feel like the incarceration is their fault. So that doesn't make sense, right? But then we also know that children's brains are wired differently than ours. And a lot of adults, we make kind of strange connections like that too. But for little people, their brains aren't wired fully. And so they see this thing that has happened and in some way they blame themselves. They wonder what they could have done differently. And then mommy or daddy wouldn't be in jail, right? They wouldn't have disappeared. They wouldn't be out of their life. And if you could only imagine kind of like putting on your empathy moment, like imagine how that must feel to a 7-year-old, just thinking that they in some way had something to do with that or could have prevented it. And children, even adults who have a family member who's incarcerated, they're going to be teased, they're going to be bullied more often because of that. And so knowing that these are just some of the beginnings of like the impact on the child, right? So we have children who feel stigmatized, they're afraid, they don't know what's going to happen next, they don't know who to trust, they're getting teased, they're getting bullied. That's just, again, like that's impacting a child. Well, imagine how this incarceration can then impact a family. And so thinking about that stigma of the kid who's getting bullied at school because they have an incarcerated parent, like that stigma transcends to adulthood too. Like adults, we are we can avoid people because we know things. Adults gossip. Adults treat people differently because of their life experiences. So adults in a child's life, adults with family members who are incarcerated are also treated differently. And so there's a stigma around that. And it can become like the family secret. And so there's a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, a lot of quiet. Don't tell anybody that. Daddy's on vacation, right? That can exist. Or it could be a flip side where it almost becomes a badge of honor. And either way, like both of those typical responses to that stigma can cause a disconnect. It can really distance people from connecting with others and being truthful and being honest and having meaningful relationships. Thinking back to like the person who was incarcerated, they were a member of the family. And when that person gets pulled away from the police who are sent here to protect us, and maybe they did something worth being arrested for or not, that's not up for discussion in this moment, but who can you really trust? If the police officer arrested, this parental figure, this family member, like who can we really count on? Can we count on the police who turned them in? Even social workers. So I work in social work. There's a distrust of social workers. Like maybe we're going to learn some information that will turn over to the police or will get somebody into trouble. So that begins a distrust of even people who are trying to help. And you'll experience that potentially within your own congregations. And then there's even a distrust of friends, family members. Are they going to still be my friend? Are they talking about me behind my back? Are they going to reject me? So it becomes like a more and more distant connection from other people. Thinking too, a family member gets incarcerated, the entire dynamics of that family has to shift. So let's say mom is incarcerated, and let's say mom did typical nurturing responsibilities within the household, and dad is in the household. Dad now has to step it up in that regard. Potentially you're losing an income, you're losing somebody to spend time with the children, supervise the children, or perhaps the only caregiver is arrested and is incarcerated, and now the children have to be in a brand new environment. So some typical dynamics that shift is the responsibility of discipline, the responsibility of bringing in money, who's going to bring it in, you're down in income or down child support, and often children will take on like parenting responsibilities and roles, where like the 12-year-old is the one in charge of the little ones while mom is working 2 jobs just to pay the bills. So those are just some of the dynamics that are going to shift. And this person's gone, and I've mentioned that. It's a different kind of grief, but it is a grief, right? Like they're not present, they're not there, and who can they turn to share their feelings? And I'll talk about too in just a second is how families cope with this grief, with this loss, with this change. But who can they really turn to? Who can they talk to? So as a congregation, I'm so sorry. Oh, sorry about that. We had an announcement at work. But who can they really share this with, this feeling of grief and loss? And so in addition to all of that, there are all these shifts in dynamics and in life, and that creates a great deal of stress for families. So when you think about, and I don't know if Monica or Rebecca, if you all can do a poll, if you have those capabilities or not, but if you think just for a second, what is some of the stress that you could imagine a family or a child would experience due to the incarceration? What are some things that would stress you out if suddenly a member in your family was incarcerated? And I don't know it. I can't see.
Yeah, I can't. This is Rebecca. I can't do a poll, but I'm going to post that in the Q&A and people can answer.
Okay, that's great. So my little slide popped up and put your thoughts. This is a great time when you're thinking about working with people. the biggest thing, like one of the most wonderful things you can do is to really take the time and think about their experiences and what that might feel like, right? The empathy, right? Really getting in there with that. And meeting people where they are. So if you could just begin to imagine what this stress looks like, you're constantly worrying about money, how you're going to pay the bills, how are you going to pay to keep a roof over your head, how are you going to get places, just even the cost of transportation, gas, these visits potentially to visit somebody who's incarcerated, can you afford the gas to get there, if it's 100 miles away, the calls just to keep in touch are often collect calls, those still exist. There's anxiety, there's the stigma, really as a family unit you've been abandoned by this person in your family, whether there's a reason for it or not, it feels like abandonment, and potentially you've been abandoned by your family and friends who now reject you because of it. How am I even going to be able to feed my kids if I don't have money coming in from child support or from this income? Like, can my kids eat? And there's actually some new research out about kids and not having enough food, and teenagers are quicker to be hungry and to not have the amount of food that they need because they're giving that up so that their younger siblings can eat. So which kids do I feed? Right? How can I feed them, and how can I feed myself? Where are we going to live? There's fear. Is this going to happen again? Who can I trust? You know, these things just go on and on. And so just understanding that incarceration is incredibly stressful for even the children. These are things children worry about too. Adults, like, we're pretty transparent when we're stressed out. So they can see that, they can feel that, they can hear the conversations taking place. And so then I'm just going to glance through this. Every family copes with all of this stress and all of these experiences in different ways. And so there's 5 typical family coping styles. And of them all, one is the most healthy, and that's the functioning family. And so a functioning family is a family that continues to have contact with a person who's incarcerated, but not at the expense of the rest of their life, right? So they continue contact, they build relationships, they acknowledge these feelings, potentially the stress, but they continue to maintain the rest of their life. The flip side of that, the opposite, is the family on hold. And this is a family that doesn't talk about the negatives about somebody getting incarcerated. They do everything they can to maintain that relationship, even if it is at the expense of everything else. So phone calls are taking place, visits are taking place, but it becomes at the forefront of maintaining that relationship. And so everything else kind of gets put on hold. Then there's the parallel family. The parallel family is a family who life is going to go on, and they don't spend a whole lot of time like doing much about it. Like they don't really talk about the incarceration. They have some contact with them, but they're really like, this is just something that happened. We're just gonna like suck it up, buttercup, and keep going. The estranged family is the family who is cut off from the incarcerated loved one. And you can imagine that potentially is a kid who's immediately cut off from their parent because of this. And that choice is often made by the people who are out, right? Or sometimes it's made by the person on the inside. And so that's completely out of a kid's control. And so that's an estranged family. They don't have any contact. It's typically not something like it's cut off. They don't talk about their feelings, what's happened. And then there's the turbulent family, where if they have any contact with the person who's incarcerated, it's minimal and it's pretty unpredictable. It's pretty unpleasant. It's a negative connotation. And they deal with all of these emotions, all of this stress in very unhealthy ways or kind of out of control ways. So those are just some typical family coping styles, and that's good to know. That's good to know, not to say that people who do the estranged thing, not to say they're wrong, but it's good to understand where they're coming from, especially when you're working with them within your churches and within your congregations.